Today I'm going to start covering these walls. In the shower area we're going to get some Durock concrete board, and everywhere else of course is going to get drywall. In order to flush the lip of this tub with the walls, I don't want to have a big change in angle. I want to keep it in plane. So I've got these furring strips that I've already ripped down, and they're going to go on top of each stud in order to plane that surface out so I don't have that dipping in effect. So now that I have all my furring strips up and I have all my backing blocks in, I'm ready to start hanging some cement board. Something else I thought I'd mention is as you put these screws into this concrete board, you're going to have some debris that comes out of the hole. Have some, particles of concrete that are going to be in the tub, and you don't want your tub to be all scratched up. And so from time to time you need to clean that stuff out. You could lay some cardboard down there, but what tends to happen there is that the particles just end up underneath the cardboard, and then you end up scratching the tub anyway. So just keep it clean, keep your shoes clean enough, or wear socks. But it's the particles in there that if you stand on them, they'll get ground into the tub. If they just land in there, they're not going to scratch it. The surface is harder than that. Keep it clean. Keep a bucket of water and a sponge, and just wipe those pieces out and keep them out from under your feet. So this is a product called Lexel, and I'm going to use this in all of the seams and over all the screw heads, at least from the shower head down. It's going to provide another layer of protection to help keep water out from behind the Durock. When it comes to hanging drywall, there's a couple things you should know. You never want to have cut butt joints anytime you can avoid those, because they're impossible to get rid of and they're more likely to crack out. When you drywall around a door opening like this, a lot of times I see people will put a piece in, they'll put a piece here, they'll put a little piece here. You're just asking for cracks there and there. It's going to happen every time. I've had to come through and repair that stuff who knows how many times. And so we want to start with a full piece that goes all the way across here, and then we'll cut this opening out. It's a little bit easier if the jamb isn't there, but we can manage. The other thing to think about is, throughout whatever you're doing with drywall, you want to make your finishing easier. You want all your factory edge joints together so that they can be finished. Having a place for that mud to go is what makes a good drywall job. If you have to put together cut joints, try to find a way to make them sink down so that there's room for mud. Otherwise, they're going to have to be floated out forever, and they're still going to make some kind of a hump. Drywall is one of the easiest products, one of the easiest building materials there is to cut. Once you score it, it'll break right in half. Then you just run your knife across the backside. But it's also one of the most brittle. And so you never want to force a piece of drywall into place. That'll just give you all kinds of problems. Now I've cut the top couple inches off of this to get rid of that taper, because up against the ceiling I don't need it. I have this panel cut to fit here, but I don't have it cut out for the door jamb yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up there, and I'm going to put some screws across the top so it can hang. Then I'm going to cut it in place where it fits around this jamb. You definitely want to take your time if you don't want to give your finishers a bunch of extra work, and you want the best product possible. This piece was already secured with nails, but I want to go ahead and screw it off because I want to be sure it's strong enough to hold my tile. Alright, so I have all the drywall hung. Now it's time to move into the mud work. Now you can see I never would piece one together like this typically if I had to finish and texture the walls, but I know that I'm going to run tile up to this height. So everything below there needs to be structurally sound, needs to be nicely in plane, but other than that, doesn't have to be hidden joints. Now, other than my inside corners, basically I just have two joints. I have this joint on this side and this joint on this side. And one of the reasons why we run drywall long ways is so that those are always at a good working height. That's really helpful. I have done them where there's an 8-foot ceiling, I use an 8-foot board and all my joints are vertical, and that works, but this is definitely my preferred way, and it seems to be considerably more efficient with materials this way. So, as far as the inside corners go, I don't like to do intersecting joints at the same time. I like to have one done separately of the other because I can get my mud spread onto this joint nice and evenly and then come through here to work this joint and mess that all up. So I like to separate those, at least until we're further along in the process. You'll see most drywall specialists use paper tape here, where you put in a bed of mud, put the paper tape on, and then put another coat of mud on top of it. And they even have a really neat contraption that will do all of those steps in one pass. But for my purposes here, this is what works best for me. I've tried the paper tape with some success, but it just takes one bad joint to have to come back in and fix to make me never want to use that product again. So this stuff kind of reminds you of wire mesh inside a concrete sidewalk or something. It just reinforces the joint compound that will be in this joint and helps keep it from cracking. And my results speak for themselves. This works just as well as the paper tape, if not better. You can think less of me as a drywall person if you feel that way if you feel that passionately about paper tape. And that's fine. Because I'm not just a drywall guy. I have to be proficient in every trade. Alright, so in this bucket I have what they call 5-minute mud or hot mud, and it's used mainly for patchwork. In a big house you would never do this stuff, but it cuts down on the drying time significantly. When they say 5 minutes, by the way, it's not completely set up in 5 minutes. You just have about 5 minutes worth of working time once you mix it with your water. In this bucket I just have a little bit of warm water and a grout sponge. The grout sponge is just going to be used to put water in my tray. And right now I just have a 4-inch knife and a little bit of a stiff one that I'll use to mix it up. I'm just going to put a layer of water across the bottom to help keep the mix from sticking to the bottom. Now you never want to mix up too much at once because it will set up on you. And if you don't get it 100% mixed up perfectly, that's okay. Go ahead and put it on the wall as best you can because it's going to set up quick. Now I've switched to just a little bit bigger knife. This is a 6-inch knife. And I'm not going to use this 5-minute mud to fill in my screw holes, unless I just happen to have some left over. Some of the other advantages to this type of mud, in addition to it setting up faster, it also shrinks less, and so sometimes you can get by with fewer coats if your base coat is this hot mud. Now, I'm not looking for perfection here. I just want to make a pass that won't have to be sanded too much, if at all, and takes up some of that gap. Now this is dry, but I want to make sure there's nothing sticking out on top. So I'm just going to hit it with my flat edge of this taping knife and make sure there's just no bumps. I've got a 10-inch knife for this, and I have my mud set pretty thin, so it's real easy to fling it all over the place. But just work it onto the joint. And the knife will practically do the work for you. Now you see this line right here? That means that I've picked up a piece of trash of some sort, and so it's important to find that and get it out of your mud. Otherwise it'll just keep doing that and ruin your whole day. See that? That is the gap that we're filling up with our drywall mud. That factory edge that's on the side of each sheet is tapered and is designed to allow room for this joint. And there it is. Even though we already have a coat of mud on here, there's still a gap, and that's what we want to fill. Now you see the way that's already starting to dry. I haven't even quite finished putting this second coat on. And this isn't, you know, hot mud or 5-minute mud or anything like that. This is just regular general purpose mud. But out here on the edges, that's already dry. And you can tell, you know, when a coat is dry because it'll be bright white. But this part is darker right now because that's that gap that we're filling up. All right, so my second coat is nice and dry. Now I'm going to get ready for the third coat. Now, some people will sand this coat, and they wouldn't be wrong to do so. I'm just going to give it a little scrape here and there to knock down any of the high spots that I made when I was applying that last coat. Again, this is shrunk just a little bit, so there's still some room. See if I can show you. There's still some room. Flashlight helps a little bit. There's still, you can still see light underneath there, so there's still some room inside this low spot to fill. But each coat gets a little bit thinner, and so it dries faster. Again, the guys that do this kind of work every day, this is their main job, obviously they're going to be a lot better and more efficient at it than me. But the quality of the product, I feel what I do is just as good, if not better, than a lot of them. It's always easier to get a good joint when you have those two factory tapered edges together. Where the real art comes in is making repairs go away and blending your texture into a pre-existing texture wall. But that's another show. I usually sand on just a little bit of a bias adjacent to the joint itself. We don't want to dig in and take any of our drywall back out of that joint that we worked so hard to put in there. We also want this edge where the compound meets the paper to pretty much go away. We don't want to feel any kind of lip like I have right there. Get that off of there. I also want to hit all of my screw heads and any other drywall compound that's on these walls. I always like to prime my walls before and after texture if possible, but definitely before texture when you're doing knockdown. It's extremely important because your texture will dry at different rates depending on the porosity of the surface that it's being stuck to. So the primer makes that surface consistent. Okay, so there are 3 factors that contribute to the pattern that you'll get out of your texture hopper. The first one is the consistency of your drywall compound or mud. The next one is the size of the orifice, and that's controlled by 2 ways. One is the size of the hole. This kind of looks like one of those pencil sharpeners, and you can set it to any one of these. Obviously, the larger pieces that you want on the ceiling, the larger hole you're going to use. That's also controlled by how far back I pull this trigger. There's a stop on this one that will set it to a certain depth, but I like to control this as I go. The last factor is how much air pressure. So the thinner the mud, the smaller the hole, and the higher the air pressure, the smaller the particles of texture you'll have on your surface. Right now I have my texture a little bit thicker because I'm doing knockdown. We're going to do the ceiling first. Putting the mud into this hopper is a good place to have some help. You definitely want the mud thin enough that it will at least run down the funnel of your hopper so that it can be picked up and sprayed on the surface. If it won't run down to the bottom, you've got it too thick. And most texture, your mud is going to have to be pretty thin. Another thing to note, you could save a piece of drywall and experiment on, but we've got all this plastic here, and that'll give me a good enough indicator if I'm in the ballpark with my settings. I'm going to take my time here and just get the whole surface covered at just the pattern that I like. Once I have the ceiling covered, I have to wait for the texture to dry. If I try to knock it down too early, it's just going to make big flat spots and I'll have to start over. If I wait too long, the texture can be fully dry. It won't knock down at all with a knife, but it can be lightly sanded. I've had some pretty good results by doing it that way. Here's a final shot of the ceiling, and for good measure, here's a shot of the wall. If you have any questions about this project, be sure to put them in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching.